hello, friends. Hello. I hope you're doing well. All of those who are tuning in to us, this is Regarding Men. We hold men in high regard. I'm Janice Fiamengo, and I'm joined by Paul Elam and Tom Golden. And we're talking about a fascinating topic today, and that is MGTOW, men going their own way. And our subject today is basically where are these men going to? Why are they going their own way? And where are they going to? What are the conditions that create MGTOW? What does MGTOW stand for? And a whole bunch of issues, relationship between men's rights activists and MGTOW, and whether one can be both. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions, I think, rather than saying a lot, I hope, although probably I'll have my say as well.
With an opinion.
Yeah, I'll probably keep in the background, but I've got a lot of interesting questions. Now, when I started being interested in men's issues, which was in about 2013, fall of 2013, I would say, spring of 2013, I gave my first, essentially, kind of anti-feminist talk, but I was already interested in men's issues at that point, and I felt outraged that feminism had taken over, particularly the academy, so thoroughly and had so entirely demonized men and sidelined any positive or caring or empathetic discussion of their issues. So I gave this talk at the University of Toronto, and it was after that that I started getting a ton of emails from men that completely opened my eyes to the situation of men, young and old, in our man-hating, indifferent to men culture. And at that point, I think I didn't really make any kind of distinction between different sort of groups within the manosphere. And I don't even know how I came to know about MGTOW. And maybe what we should do is start with our definitions of how we understand what MGTOW actually means. And before we do that, I'm writing for Vice magazine, and it said a lot of ridiculous things. Of course, the first thing we would expect, what it said right on cue, was that men going their own way are men who are threatened by the gains made by women in the rough and slow progress towards equality. So these are men who are resentful of that, who hate feminism, who hate women, who have a problem with the idea of gender equality. Well, that's not surprising at all. But one of the things he said that I thought was quite interesting, and it was the thing that obviously made him, or was one of the things that pleased him, was the idea that MGTOW had created a serious fissure in the men's rights movement, and that men's rights activists don't like MGTOW men, and vice versa. And he didn't really have very much evidence for that at all. He had very little evidence for any of the claims he made, but that was something that caused him a certain amount of satisfaction. So, which kind of in a way surprised me, because honestly, I hadn't got that sense from my eavesdropping on lots of conversations, in the comment sections of videos and things like that. It seemed to me that actually MGTOW and men's rights activists may have different concerns and objectives, but it seemed to me that they tend to have a fairly friendly relationship. So maybe we could start with that. Is there tension within the men's rights movement between MRAs or men's issues advocates and MGTOW? And how would you guys define MGTOW? I'll plunge in and say I always thought MGTOW was just basically men who had made a decision not to make women, specifically pleasing women, living their lives, in order to please women, men who had decided not to make women the center. And that after that, and also I guess I would say also that these were men who were aware that being a man in our culture, in our society, is dangerous, and who were taking steps to protect themselves from the various dangers that being involved with women can bring. That would be kind of my first working definition.
Yes, I would go along with that one. I would add a little bit of something. You know, I see the MGTOW folks as being pioneers. You know, they are really on a consciousness level, they're pioneers. They're leaving the blue pill idea that men are solely worth something because of what they do. And this thrusts them into this place of seeing that they have value in themselves beyond just what they do. And that is a huge shift, I think, for a lot of reasons. Now, this is not you won't see this in the public domain. You know, people aren't going to be writing about it, but that's just my perception of what I see, the consciousness shift of going from the blue pill idea of I'm only worthy of the things that I do into this whole concept of, you know what, I'm a human being, and I have worth just in my beingness, not just in my doingness. So that's a big piece for me. How about you, Paul?
Well, let me see. I'll see if I can be a little bit nuanced here without being pedantic, which
Probably not.
going to be a challenge for me. One of the things that I think is challenging about even understanding the concept is that the term itself, MGTOW, is semantic quicksand.
Yeah.
Men going their own way. And so the moment that my way is different from your way, which one of us is MGTOW? And I would argue it's both of us.
Yeah.
Because you're bound to that idea that this is about selecting your own way. But it is, for the most part, as Janice said, it's men who have taken a look at the social contract with women and found it exploitive and abusive.
Yes.
And they're saying, no, I'm just not going to do that. To answer Janice's question about friction between MRAs and MGTOW, yes, there has been some of that. Not a great deal. You have a contingent in the MGTOW community that has always been resentful of MRAs because their perception is that MRAs want to, and I'm paraphrasing here, want to make the plantation more fit for men to walk back into. That by trying to correct problems with family courts or trying to renegotiate a social contract with women or trying to address some of these issues that have to do with men's rights and their civil liberties, that we're somehow encouraging men to go back into the entrapment of the hypergamous bond with women.
Mm-hmm.
And that does not define the whole MGTOW community. It's almost like religion. I know some religious people that are the finest people I've ever met in my life. They're wonderful human beings. And I've met religious people that were pure pond scum. The being of a particular persuasion or belief system really doesn't define the individual. And we have, for instance, a lot of MGTOW who patronize and support A Voice for Men, a men's rights group, lots and lots of them. Mm-hmm. And I get a lot of people on my channel that identify as MGTOW. And we have great conversations. So the answer is sort of yes and no, Janice. There is some friction there that happens sometimes. My position on that is that if you want to take exception to my trying to make the world a little better for men, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
And we have that understanding with each other, and that's fine. But I do think men in general have reacted to the changes in what's happening with gender politics in the last 50 years. And one of those reactions is a pretty substantial group of men and I agree with Tom, they're pioneering. They're saying, I'm letting go of this. And it's not just women that a lot of these guys are rejecting. They're rejecting the corporate ladder.
Yes.
They're rejecting being wage slaves. They're learning to become entrepreneurs. They're practicing self-improvement. They're trying to improve their lives. Some of them, to be honest, again, you have all different kinds. Some guys are sitting there stewing. They will sit there and stew for 5 years. And they'll be bitter and upset. Other guys will turn it into the best thing that ever happened in their lives. Mm-hmm. That, I think, speaks to the power of MGTOW philosophy that's there. But it is at the core, I think, about rejecting the social contract with women as it stands today and deciding that we are men whose lives are worth taking care of. And we're not going to be measured by what we produce or who we protect or who we provide for. We're going to determine our self-worth in our own way. The world be damned.
Sounds pretty good. So rejecting the social contract with women then, so what does that mean then in terms of the extent to which MGTOW men still, or do they not, involve themselves with women? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I do remember early on, I read an article by you, Paul, in which you asked the question, can a married man be MGTOW? And I should have found the article again and reread it, but I was looking to see what else was there on the internet about MGTOW. And I seem to remember that you said, depending on how you define MGTOW, if a married man makes changes in his life and his attitude toward who he is and, you know, what he owes the world and all that kind of thing, that he could be both married and MGTOW, which I assume is maybe a bit controversial, but I don't know.
Well, and really, the point really wasn't to try to establish a case for married men being MGTOW. What I was trying to do, and perhaps didn't do as near as eloquently as I would like to have, or as clearly.
No, I remember it being really good.
That when you attach yourself to an idea of going your own way, I take that literally. I take that to mean that if a man is married, but he rejects the social contract with women, the one that starts out with a guy on his knees bearing gold and diamonds to try to get approval, if he rejects that, if he takes care of himself and literally goes his own way as defined by him, it is not in my power to define for him whether or not he's MGTOW. That was the point. And I remember, oh gosh, the backlash I got on that was phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
Because just the hint of my saying that it wasn't my place to determine for somebody else if they want to call themselves MGTOW was like, and then I thought, the reactions to it kind of stupefied me, because I'm thinking, how is it that I'm sitting here defending a man defining his own path and calling it his own way, and I've got a bunch of guys identifying as MGTOW telling me, no, you can't do that. This is the path. This is the way. This is how you, well, what happened to my way? It was my first thought. And it is. And that's why I really have treated the term as semantic quicksand. It's an appropriate term. I think it works to service a lot of men. And at the same time, your own way means your own way. And that can be a cruel master for people who want to be ideological about their philosophy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
What do you think, Tom? Would you define yourself as MGTOW?
You know, for me, I have felt like MGTOW since the mid-70s, not particularly having to do with women, but just having to do with my own perception of the culture and what I see it being and how I didn't want to be a part of it. You know, my wife and I are very different in a lot of ways, and we both went part-time with the kids. And so I was a stay-at-home dad basically, and she was a stay-at-home mom. And we shared that. And, you know, so we kind of did things the way we wanted to and not the way we were, quote, supposed to. And so from that point, like in the mid-70s, I kind of felt like I was going my own way because I didn't have any support from any place. You know, it was like it was out there on an island in a lot of ways. So yeah, I feel like that, but not as far as the marriage piece. I've been happily married for, you know, since the 70s.
Would you say it was conscious, Tom, from that early point in the 70s, that like you were articulating to yourself that your dissatisfaction with what the culture said you should be and how you should behave?
It was all sorts of factors that just came tumbling down right about the same time. You know, I'd just gotten out of college. I'd just been initiated into a way of meditation, which completely changed my life. You know, just completely changed me altogether. And those things, and my wife too. My wife is just a fascinating human being. And so those things all together, and having kids too, will just change you completely. And so, all of that, boom, 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 just sort of put me into a space where it was just very different. And I knew that I was never going to fit in with things the way they were, And it made it so much easier once I started realizing about men, it made it so much easier to just start understanding men in a different kind of way, rather than having being wedded to a way of doing things and seeing things before that was culture driven. I didn't have that. I didn't have that problem. So when I saw men being discriminated against, I saw men being discriminated against, not something where I had to turn it into something that was nice or sweet or, oh, poor women kind of thing. I said, oh, this is fucked up, Anyway, that's too much about me.
No, that's really interesting.
Oh, that's great stuff.
Yeah. So would you guys say, like, is there a MGTOW philosophy, and is it written down somewhere? Is there a book on MGTOW? I don't know. Is there a MGTOW philosopher, or is it something that's been just kind of gradually worked out over time, kind of in chat rooms and, different online groups? Or is it nothing formalized at all? Because the reason I'm asking partly is that this guy that wrote this Vice hit piece, which of course was, these things, you have to laugh because otherwise it's so unfair and, ridiculous. It's like absolutely inconceivable to think of somebody writing about a group of women who had decided, with relatively little animus towards men, but with a conscious decision to reject a particular kind of social structure, although he, of course, wouldn't really make that distinction. He kept hammering away at the idea that these men don't like women, although that's never been the sense I got from what I've learned about MGTOW. Most of those guys will say, love women, but the system is set up that the relationships are just so dangerous, so messed up. It doesn't matter whether you like women or not. You just can't allow yourself to be trapped in this system that literally kills men and literally tells men that they have no value except what they can give to women and children in some cases, in terms of their financial, their wage earning capacity, their labor. Anyway, but this guy, of course, wrote about these guys in the most contemptuous and condescending manner you could imagine, but he claimed that it's all written down. I don't know where he got this from, but he had like these 5 steps. No, wait a minute. It was 4 levels. Have you ever heard of this? The 4 levels of MGTOW.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. And so there's level 0 when you first sort of become aware, you take the red pill. Then there's level 1 where you reject long-term relationships, supposedly, but you still have short-term. Level 2, you also reject short-term relationships. You won't participate any kind of hook up or anything with a woman. Level 3, you disengage economically. You refuse to earn more money than is necessary just to basically sustain life. And I love this. He says that a person at this stage, quote, views the government as tyrannical and is trying to actively drain money from the bureaucrats. Oh, really? He views the government as tyrannical. Why would you view it that way? You could have your children taken away, be forced to pay for them, even though you can't see them, and put in jail if you can't pay for them.
To say, I think there's about 60 million level 4 MGTOW out there, if that's the case.
This is called projection.
This is level 3. Level 4 is supposedly complete societal disengagement. Now, actually, I think if this is true, there'd be a level 5, and that is what our friend Steve Brule is living, where you actually leave the country altogether and refuse to support the country that imprisons you and tyrannizes over you in any way at all. But that he doesn't talk about that. Anyway, so yeah, I was kind of interested because I'd never seen it mapped out, in such a delineated way.
And I personally, I mean, that just sounds like a forum post that somebody made somewhere, or an
He
article
made it all up
somebody wrote,
in
or
15
no, well,
minutes.
no, I've heard of these levels before. I've read about them in MGTOW forums. Whether they can be used to define everybody who might identify as going their own way that's a resounding no from
Yeah,
me.
really.
And it's no wonder that you got it's interesting and not surprising that when you searched for MGTOW, that Google returned you the hit pieces and ignored the volumes of stuff that's been written on this topic in a much more even-handed way. That's been going on for a long time. Let me pull in one of the questions here because this is fit.
Okay.
We got a question from Guillermo Jose del Solar.
Oh, yes.
What is an MRA? And I don't know if he's asking literally what is an MRA, which is men's rights advocate or activist, or if he's asking that rhetorically in keeping with our attempts to define what a MGTOW is here. But the only thing I can say is that I like the term a little bit better because it's more concise. An MRA is somebody who advocates or practices activism for the rights of men. That's a lot more cut and dried to me than something as, your own, whatever your own way means. It's so open to interpretation. And we've also got here from Vernon Miggs regarding men. I definitely think that men should be esteemed and admired for the creative accomplishments they make for themselves, in contrast to being judged strictly by what he does, slaves, and loses for others, and never himself.
Nicely
My question for the whole gang is, do they have an example of a creative, accomplished man that they admire in this way?
I got one. I admire Paul. So I'm serious.
Absolutely.
I'm serious. As a creative, accomplished man who's going his own way. I mean, it's just
I don't have
right
to
before
take
our
this
eyes.
abuse from anybody.
It's true, though. It's true. And there's a lot of guys out there. If you go to the ICMI, the last ICMI, you will meet lots of creative men who are going their own way, who are accomplished and doing their thing. I mean, it's like, it's a wonderful experience, really. And you see a lot of guys like that because there's lots out there,
Yeah.
And I just have to insist on returning the favor. I feel the same way about Tom, about Warren, and I would say Janice, but we're talking about men here. And I've encountered many men over the years that I've been doing this. There are guys that have really broken free from the typical social expectations, who are nobody's slaves. And guess what? Some of those guys are married, some are not.
Right. Right.
I can't say that, if I can't contain it to just MGTOW. As a matter of fact, most of the MRAs that I've known over the years, who I considered to be the most dedicated and trustworthy of people, and people that commanded my respect, have been married. Go figure. That doesn't exclude single men at all, because I know plenty of them that I really. But the guys who have worked at this tirelessly and gone after it for year after year after year, sometimes in the face of great adversity, are almost all married or in long-term relationships. And I guess I could say I'm MGTOW to the extent that I won't get married. I made that decision. I got there. A lot of guys get to MGTOW through the family courts. I could raise my hand, but to give up a house in a divorce that you ate peanut butter sandwiches for 3 years to save the down payment for, and you will come out of it with a different worldview. I can promise you, I sure did. And my worldview was never get married again. It's just too risky. But I certainly don't take away anything from any man who does. I just hope they choose wisely.
Choose wisely. And Paul, I'd love to hear some from you about the origins of MGTOW, because I don't think many people know about that.
Well, we'll try to get it below later. After this up, I'll go track it down and I did a talk on this called The Real History of MGTOW. And I won't try to repeat it all verbatim here. It's too complicated. But as I recall here, and somebody will probably bust me if I get my dates wrong, but I'll do my best. The first in print, and by the way, I would suggest going to gynocentrism.com, reading Peter Wright's material. He is the authority on this subject. And a lot of the stuff, when I did this piece on the history of MGTOW, I consulted with him and got a lot of information from him. But the first in print mentioning of men going their own way was pre-Civil War, around the late 1850s. And it was a criticism. It started as it was a response to criticism. They were talking about levying a tax on men who refused to get married. And there were actually activists out there at the time, female activists out there trying to push for a tax on unmarried men because of all the forlorn, lonely young women who couldn't find husbands to take care of them. They should become wards of the state, and we should take the money from single men and give it to them. And she said, and these efforts at legislate, this was a woman that wrote this, I forget her name, said that the targets of this were at young men who just chose to go their own way.
Wow, she used those words.
Yes, those exact words, and there's an image of that. We'll get all this stuff. It's on Peter Wright's site and in the video talk that I did. But there's an image of the newspaper article from that time that he, I don't know, brilliantly dug up somehow. I don't know how he managed to do it. But the term came in and out, and there was bachelor clubs, and there were the idea of men rejecting what they considered to be slavery to women has come in and out of vogue for hundreds of years. I mean, and it was, just that first mention of men going their own way was what it was describing dedicated bachelorhood.
Right.
And so, and if you ask
probably gay men too.
Yes, but if you ask a lot of men who identify as going their own way, they will say the one requirement is you can't be married. This is what a lot of these men say, which makes it synonymous with bachelorhood.
Right.
If that's how you're going to define it. And that movement, that tendency of men, or being a subculture of men who refuse to marry and who want to live their lives for themselves, has been going on for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And it came back into common usage, as far as we know, in the early 2000s, when there were men who had set up men's rights forums back in the old, if you remember Yahoo forums, those old discussion boards, with the antiquated technology they were using at the time. And they noticed that they would grow to a certain size and then guys would disband, and they wrote about this saying men would just go their own way. So it actually came out of the men's rights movement, the term. And it caught on, and here we are today with this phenomena that's happening that terrifies a lot of people. I mean, one of the things I love about MGTOW is it scares the shit out of society.
And why does it scare people?
Yes.
Why? Why does it scare people?
Because if men aren't going to take care of people who are, we're in trouble if we don't have. And I want to reassure people in the world, look, there are always going to be plenty of dumbed down blue pill men to do the bidding of women in the world. You don't have anything to worry about.
That's probably true.
Yeah, it is.
Oh God.
There's only, I think it takes a different kind of individual to see through gynocentrism, to see through hypergamy, to see through the social contract that really does literally start with men on their knees, bearing their earnings, asking for approval. And for some reason, it's hard for men to look at that and see what a scam it is.
I know. Crazy, crazy.
So only,
Yeah.
I think 1 or 2% of the population at any given
Yeah.
time is even going to be able to see that.
Yes,
But I
think
really
that's
do
right.
like the guys who can, because they're
Yes.
so, call me MGTOW, call me MROA, whatever you want to call me. They're in the same red pill camp.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good way to say it, because I feel very strongly about, my adoration, of men who are MRAs or MGTOW or whatever. I mean, I just love that group. I feel very comfortable with all of them,
Yeah. Well, and the thing is too, that like there actually isn't always a clear distinction between men who go their own way and men who help society, because often men who go their own way do end up helping society tremendously. They help everybody because they create and they invent and they produce, they help to create wealth, they provide jobs for people, they invent wonderful things, they do research, they create, they're scientists, they're doctors, they create technologies that make our lives better, and they do all that kind of stuff. So I mean, to me that seems to be the ideal, is that when men go their own way and they're finding ways to make their lives meaningful on their own terms.
Yes.
And that isn't, that doesn't necessarily involve, I mean, that involves rejecting an aspect of the social contract with women that is damaging to men, but it's not antisocial at all necessarily.
But I think one more thing they do, Janice, is the men tend to challenge the pedestrian consciousness, just the way things are. And that challenge is really critical. And I've thought for a while that, this whole thing, this MGTOW thing and the MRA thing is really challenging the pedestrian way of looking at things. And in doing so, it's sort of speeding up a consciousness shift, a shift in the way we think about things. As much as people don't like it, the more they hear about the kinds of things we're talking about and the kinds of things MGTOW people talk about, the more the consciousness of our whole culture tends to shift a little teeny bit at a time, and that's important work. And the guys out there are doing that, so good on you.
Absolutely right. I heard Tucker Carlson the other night use the term red pilled.
Yes.
And it's not the first time I've heard this in the mainstream recently.
It's seeping in. It's seeping in.
Yes,
slowly, sort of.
Slowly.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a 1,000-year journey too.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. This is not a quick deal. This is going to take probably, at least 500 years.
Yeah.
And the more men who say that, that men can have needs and desires too, that all of men's needs and desires do not have to be centered on women and saving women or helping women or serving women or whatever, that they can have needs and desires too, that they can advocate for their own identities, their own selves, their sense of who they are. It doesn't have to be dependent on how they serve a woman. I mean, that it's totally radical in terms of our cultural traditions. But when you hear it often enough, you realize that it just makes perfect sense.
Yes.
And that's what these guys that's the kind of change these guys are helping to bring about.
Yep.
We got Dean Hedges from the comments that says men have a hard time seeing this because they are such giving creatures. And he is absolutely correct.
Amen.
Men are protectors and providers by their nature, whether it's genetic or socialized. I don't want to get into the, Evo psych argument about any of this stuff, but men are giving and men feel good about themselves when they're protecting people, when they're doing things for others. This is the way men are wired. So we do run into a conflict over this stuff. When you discover red pill philosophy and you start thinking about, when I got out of a bad marriage, I looked back at how I was used financially in that arrangement. And I couldn't believe I let it happen. But the moment I started adopting philosophy with women, that if you want to spend more than one date with me, you better find your purse in that situation. The guilt I felt We're trying to pursue that was one of the biggest obstacles in my life. I had to really fight against saying, I need you to carry your weight financially.
Right.
Yeah.
Look, if we're just going to go to coffee, I'll spring for coffee, but if we're going to see each other a lot and spend time and sleep together and do things like that, you've got a job.
Yeah, I'm not going to pay for everything and fix everything, and
And it was amazing how many women heard that and said, no, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
And it's amazing how much negative blowback a man will get merely for articulating that,
Keep
whether
asking.
to women or for men. Yeah. Both men and women will rag on him and, tell him there's something wrong with him. And yeah, he's selfish, cheap,
only thinking about himself.
manipulative. Yeah. Only thinking about himself. Yeah. So, and I must admit that I mean, it is an admirable thing. Like it always come back to, this is the thing that in some ways keeps men subservient. It is one of the things that kind of cripples our movement, but it's also a wonderful thing about men. And it was certainly the thing that turned me against feminism. I would say maybe, I don't know if it was the most powerful impetus to turn me against feminism, but definitely up there. When all these guys started writing me after I gave my first talk, and so many of them, they told me stories of abuse from day one. They defined all the ways they'd been made to feel, all the words we know: disposable, not liked, not wanted, condescended to, held in contempt, seen as, substandard, all that sort of stuff. And yet they still loved women. And all they still hoped for the best. They still hoped for an end to the gender war. They still hoped that they would be able to have children and, have a family and nurture and love and be there for people that they loved. And, I just thought this is so different from what I hear from my feminist friends and from every feminist writer and from a lot of just plain women who don't necessarily identify as feminists. They don't spend so much of their emotional energy thinking about how much they still love the opposite sex and how much they still want to give to them, even though they recognize the ways that they're being harmed in the present situation. So, I mean, that was really, that blew me away, the love, the givingness of so many men. And even, the men, like, that who are angry, they'll often say, I fight not to hate women. And sometimes I feel so much anger. I feel like I'm being so badly treated, but I fight not to hate women because I want to love women, and I know not all women are bad. They go on like, and I don't see that willingness to that extent on the other side to extend that level of empathy.
No, it's easy to hate men.
It just contrast that with the Washington Post saying, why can't we hate men?
Yeah, why can't we hate men? They're all despicable. Well, she did clarify actually in a follow-up article that she mainly hates white men.
Oh yeah, well at least she got the right group.
Yeah, she knew that it was acceptable to hate one particular group. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing, and even women who don't hate men and will tell you they don't, it's just different. Like they'll still, I don't know, they still have this expectation that they will be the center, they will primarily be served, that they serve merely by existing, and that things should be set up around their conveniences, their needs, and their desires rather than the other way around. Whereas men, men just don't expect that. So
I will say though, and I think it's important to mention, I use myself as an example of this. So I was talking about, I went through a lot of women after my divorce that when it came down to the finances, they just weren't on board with the idea of paying their way. But I said, I held that standard. And then one day I met my partner now of 18 years. And I said, that's what I said to her, that, I needed somebody that will pull their weight financially. And she said, of course.
Good for her.
Right.
And good for me too, because
Exactly.
this is about a man
Absolutely.
carrying values into a relationship that's something more important than satisfying sexual needs.
Yes.
That you first have to be the kind of person that I want to be with. And too many men, the reason we have so many women whose model of relationship life is, please be my ATM with an 8-inch penis and a wallet is, as thick as a good hamburger. And that is their model of what men are supposed to be. And I think it terrifies them when men say, I'm not going to be that.
Right.
You or anybody else.
Yeah. They're astounded and outraged.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it looks good on them.
And if I could back up just a second here, I wanted to point something out. And that is, Janice, when those men wrote to you, all those things, you listened. You were able to listen to what they were saying, which is just, I'm sure it surprised them that you would actually get back to them, because men are not used to having people listen to them when they talk about their troubles. I mean, it's just outrageous. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I want to
Bless
put
your
some
heart.
icing on that cake because it's evident every time I listen to Janice that she listens to men.
Yes,
Every time I
exactly.
hear her talk,
Exactly.
it's obvious. And
Well,
they get so little of that.
I've been lucky. I had a great father. He was a man I admired a great deal, and he went his own way in many ways. He loved his work, and he loved doing it better than anybody else. He was at his memorial service, a friend of his, younger guy who fished with him. My dad was a commercial fisherman who said he was the best commercial fisherman on the West Coast, in the Pacific Northwest.
How about that?
And he meant it. Yeah. So that was my dad. And so I think I developed an admiration for men early. And then I married a great guy too. So who also loves his work, although it's a very different kind of work. And that is something that I think is so valuable about men, the way they can get so much satisfaction out of doing things well and getting like completely absorbed in work. And I think that, that is one of the ways that men can free themselves from the burden of feeling, they have to please women, and that has to become their primary goal.
Yeah.
Find the thing that they were meant to do.
Yes.
And
to do
then
it well.
do it. Yeah. Do it well and make that, whatever it is, do it well and make that a great source of satisfaction, and part of their identity of who they are, that they're men who work well.
Many men will find out, and it will surprise them, that their pursuit of women and women's approval has always stood in the way of their finding their own kind of greatness in life with what they do. They obsess on, I want to go do this and make fun so I can come back and impress women, and this is the cycle that they're in, and that is what stands between them and finding so much greater purpose in life. And then they really can end up holding their own in a relationship. But first, they got to find out who they are first.
Yeah. And that's something the MGTOW really helps with,
Yes, it does.
You pull back and you start having quiet, you start processing what's going on. You can't help but learn more about yourself,
Yeah.
Yeah, baby.
And never make a woman more important than that.
Amen. Amen.
Spoken with wisdom.
Indeed. Are we there?
I think we're there.
I think we're there. It's a good time together. And thank you all for the questions.
Yes, thank you for the questions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And I will gather links and get them to you guys for the description area on this. And I'll go ahead and post them to the Regarding Men page on Facebook, which if you're a real man, you follow.
Of course.
That was a joke. I wasn't.
All right.
Okay, well, I think
Fair enough.
we have to end with the final statement, which is that men
Are.
Good, as are you.
Take care, guys.
We'll see you.
have a great week.